first episode of Technicalls. This is going to be a show all about interviewing people in different technical fields, mostly people in the programming world and that sort of environment. But I am very pleased to be joined today by my friend Luke Stanton. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm pretty good. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, yeah, of course. Just kind of starting off, what's a little bit about you, give some background.
Yeah, so I'm from Arkansas. I currently work for a company called Red Hat, which is an open source software company. They're primarily known for like Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's a big Linux distribution. I actually don't work with that product. I work with a product called OpenShift, which is based on Kubernetes. And it's like a cloud workload management software. So kind of like an operating system for the cloud. Really interesting product. I actually don't do much coding these days since I'm in technically a support role, more customer facing. But prior to this job, I had about 12 years of programming experience in my previous job. So
Yeah, nice. How did that all kind of start? What was kind of your inspiration to get into all that?
Okay, so I didn't really have much interest in computers at all until 1993. My dad bought our first home computer, and I just started tinkering with it. It was a Gateway 2000 486 DX2. At the time it was a super fast processor, but I think the internet was just coming around that year. So I got into computers just because I like tinkering with that, and I was also a big video game fan, and I wanted to write my own video games. I was Mario, Sonic the Hedgehog fan. Played a lot of Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis. So I thought, why not? Why not write my own games? So that was kind of what got me started, or inspired me. I ended up finding out pretty quick it was much harder than I thought it would be, though. So I kind of had to give up on my game writing aspirations. But that is what initially got me started. So I was around 11 years old at the time when I started messing around with programming.
Nice. What did you use to make that?
So my dad, very kindly, we were at Best Buy one day, and I noticed there was Borland was a big, C++ compiler provider back in the day. They may still be around. I haven't followed them in a long time. But they had a product called Turbo C++, which was, kind of a stripped down DOS compiler. Asked my dad if he'd get it for me one day because I saw it on the shelf, and it was like $90, which for me at the time as an 11-year-old was a lot of money. But yeah, he was very kind to get it for me. And so I started messing around with mainly writing C code. That was really my first introduction to any computer language. I found I loved it. It was a lot of fun. I loved the problem solving aspect of it. And you could still do a lot with that product, even though it wasn't quite as nice as some of the other ones out there. I also this would have been in the days of like DOS 4 or 5, and so it was shipped with QBasic as well. They actually had a game. It was actually a pretty sophisticated little game. It was like you were a monkey. When you loaded the game up, it would be like this random cityscape, and you'd have two monkeys on buildings, and you'd throw bananas at each other. And you basically won by hitting the other monkey with a banana. It was all written in QBasic on DOS. It's just a sample program. So, I'd look through that code, just kind of figure out like, how does this work? But I was never able to actually write anything to that level myself. So, but yeah, that's how I got started was C, a little bit of C++.
That's a good place to start, a pretty basic language. And I can see, just from my minimal experience with like C++ and stuff, I can see why you did not continue very far with trying to make a video game in that.
Yeah, well, the thing is like, of course, now there's so many great platforms for writing games that are where all the work is done for you, all the physics engines and the rendering and all that. So you just have to worry about the game dynamics. So yeah, back in the early 90s, there just wasn't anything out there. At least that was cheap. If you did get something, it was probably going to be pretty expensive. So, you had to do it all yourself. But I mean, some people did it. And so actually one of the other inspirations for me was I had a really good friend. I think we met when he was 15, and he liked to code as well. So we would get together and just mess around. And he had actually written a couple of pretty cool games. He had done it like in BASIC and also I think C. Yeah, pretty inspiring to see what he had done as well. That's
So you
sweet.
kind of have explained like how you kind of got started, what inspired you, and everything like that. Which I think that's like I know like that's what got me into programming, and I think that's a pretty common story with a lot of people. Is
Mhm.
like played all these video games, and I thought like I want to do that, I want to make that.
Yeah,
So it's a great inspiration in a way to kind of
it
jumpstart
is.
people into
Yeah.
that
Well,
world. But
the thing about video games too is it's like definitely one of the most complex problems you can solve. In coding.
mm,
I mean,
yep.
there's so many things going on. There's so much math behind it. You have to be super
Hmm.
efficient with how you're using resources. It's kind of in some ways probably like the ultimate problem to solve.
Yep, and that's what makes it so much fun. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
actually I'm gonna have a game dev on a few episodes from here who's making his own indie game, and
Oh, awesome.
he's like I love the whole process because it not only scratches the like programming itch, but it even is like every other creative thing. Like if you're not on a big team, like it's like I know from my games, like I not only have to code all of the systems myself, but I have to create all of the art. I have to think up what is this game
Right.
going to be about.
Yeah.
What do you do? What's the goal? I have to write all the music. I have to do everything
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
And it's
That's
like you just said, it's the ultimate problem where it's like I get to do everything.
absolutely. Well, and it's
Hmm.
definitely like a work of art at that point. Um, One of my
Yep.
favorite games. I don't. I was really into games at this point in my life. This was back in the '90s, and then I kind of dropped out of the gaming world to a great extent. But
Yeah.
actually, my mom sold my Nintendo because I couldn't. I literally couldn't not play. So she was like, "All right, we're getting rid of this thing." So she made the decision for me. But there's a game called Braid. There's a game later that came out called The Witness. And
Okay.
anyway, the
I've heard of
the
that one.
same guy who did The Witness, he did Braid. Jonathan is his first name, I know.
Mm.
But anyway, he when he made Braid, he was the only developer, and he had one collaborator who did the artwork. So like the game was, a lot of watercolor type imagery, beautiful music, like recorded
Mm.
music, and fascinating game dynamics. I mean, like where you could reverse time and to solve
Mm.
problems, and it just when I played it, just blew me away. Like this basically was written by one guy, so uh, very
Wow.
inspiring. And I kind of realized like this guy's way smarter than I will ever be, but I could at least appreciate the masterpiece he came up with. But
It's crazy. Like, have you heard of Stardew Valley and the guy who made that?
no,
Okay, it's like a farming game, but the guy he had nobody. It was literally just him. He created the
wow,
entire game by himself, and he quit his job for it. He believed in it so
wow,
much, and so he spent like 5 or 6 years on this game. There's a great video. I'll link it in the like description or whatever. It's an amazing just little video like documentary thing on how he made it and his whole
oh, awesome,
process
yeah.
of it. But it's just an incredible. It's such an inspiration
Ah,
from that kind of stage of getting like inspired by it and having that like desire to want to do this. How did you kind of like learn more and grow into your knowledge of like the different languages and all of that?
yeah, I so 1993, 94. There wasn't like we didn't have internet at the time. I think we maybe had
Mm-hmm.
AOL online or CompuServe or something here and there, but there just wasn't a lot out there. So mostly through books. So
Mm.
I had bought a handful of mainly C programming books, which are just something you might have seen in a college course. Pretty small, pretty easy to consume, and just would go over the basics of how do you read data in or write stuff to the screen, and how do you work with file systems or work with memory. Which I ended up kind of just enjoying it for its own sake. I kind of like,
Hmm.
to me, like one thing I always loved about programming and software development is it's kind of like it's like you're building a machine, just it's virtual rather than having like real
Mm.
mechanical parts. You got this computer that you can make it do whatever you want. The sky's the limit in a sense. So
Mm.
those books were helpful though. And then I did find a book on how to write a flight simulator, actually, in C++.
Mm.
And I still have it somewhere. I need to go find it. I haven't looked at it in a long time. It was the problem was it was written for like the full Borland compiler, and I don't think I had enough libraries on my compiler to make it work. So I didn't get very far with it. But, it basically showed you like how to build a polygon based, rendered world, how to draw the cockpit on the screen, start to finish, everything. But there was some really interesting stuff in there. Like it went over the math of rendering wireframe 3D images on a screen. How do you do the projection? How do you project a 3D image on a 2D screen? How to do the matrix math for transformation. So I basically kind of just took some of those things and messed around with the concepts. But I would draw 3D objects on a screen and rotate it. That's about as far as I got. But yeah, those books are helpful. And then a lot of just tinkering and trying things out. Most of the time, figuring out what I wanted to do was harder than or beyond what I was going to be capable of pulling off by myself.
I think that's the story of any programmer or anything like that. Is like, oh, I thought this was going to be easy. Then I was just trying to make like a header or something, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's been 6 hours. From our previous conversations, you ended up after all of this, you did go to school for this, right? As well.
I did. Yeah, I did. Actually, one more thing I'll mention too. I had thought about this just recently. I kind of forgot about this because it's been so long. But so I had my friend who was in our teen years. We dabbled in programming. Later on, like when I was in high school, there was a guy I went to church with who was a super smart guy, one of the smartest guys I've ever met, and he did embedded programming. So microcontroller development. He would design circuit boards, put microcontrollers on them, and would program them. And I mean, he did fascinating stuff, digital signal processing. Like he would do equalizers for audio, where you could basically take audio input, modify the audio digitally, and then spit it back out. Or he actually made his own, this Christmas tree light music syncers, where you can basically sync lights to music for
yes
setup. Yeah, he made his own. He built his own device to do that.
Oh, dang.
He's really brilliant. He didn't go buy one. He just made one. And so he was really helpful, though. He kind of got me into the embedded programming stuff, and I never went very far with it, but it's another fascinating aspect of programming when you're dealing with like a microcontroller. And you've got a lot of really tight resources to work with, not near as much memory. So for a while, I actually thought about going that route too.
But so, what was it kind of like for you in programming school? What was it? What were the classes like? What was the whole environment like in there?
Okay, I started kind of late, actually. I didn't start until like I was 21. I wasn't sure what I was going to want to do, and I eventually decided to go to UCA, University of Central Arkansas, to study computer science and math. And UCA at the time, and they probably still do, they had a great comp sci program. So we learned mostly C++ was like the core curriculum language. And then I took a couple of Java classes, but almost everything else was C++. So in general, it was really helpful. They were challenging classes. They made sure we learned the concepts well. We did one class with some assembly language, which I loved, actually. I really enjoyed the being close to the hardware where you're manipulating registers and dealing with memory directly. So that was fun. So in general, great experience. I also got to take what I really found interesting was I ended up finding I really liked the mathematical side of things. And so I took a class called Theory of Computation that UCA offered, which gets more into like the mathematical theory behind primarily parsing code languages is probably really the main application. But like, how do you, what's the theory behind like processing a regular expression or processing any code language? And then they had another corollary class called compiler construction, which dealt with how do you write your own compiler? Basically, how do you write a compiler that can interpret a computer language and translate it into like machine code or something, which was something that always fascinated me as well. So to me, that was kind of I enjoyed that probably more than any other thing I took at UCA was when we got to that level.
Wow. Kind of looking back on all of like your experience of like learning and going to school and all of that, is there any sort of way that you would have liked to have done differently? Like if it was you now and you could go back, is there something that you would say like do this, or do you think that it was kind of all preparing you and it was all helpful?
Yeah, it's a good question. I really enjoyed school. Um, I did probably a lot of professional programmers would say this, that you learn actually most of your skill on the job,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
so one thing that UCA did not do this, and I don't know if others, maybe this has changed, but I know like University of Arkansas wasn't doing this either, but that is like, they'd never talked about design patterns or computer architecture in terms of like, how do you like architect a piece of software. We never talked about refactoring code, or where you're, taking a messy code base and cleaning it up.
Mm.
So I would probably, if I could have, I don't know that I would do this, but it might have been helpful if I'd had an internship, because I didn't do an internship in college.
Mm.
And that would have given me some more like real world experience while I was still in school. That would have maybe counterbalanced the more academic approach.
Mm.
So
Mm.
computer science programs seem to be
Yeah.
great. They're great at teaching you the concepts of the language, but they don't always talk about the more complex topics that are involved with building software. So,
And a lot of that sort of stuff, like you said, is like best learned kind of practically as well. But stuff
it
like I
is.
know you were mentioning, like building your own compiler, are those a lot of those sort of things you're not really going to learn on the job, because
Absolutely.
and even though it's stuff that you enjoy and you're like, man, this is awesome, and stuff that you
Yeah.
can work on yourself. So,
Right.
but I know you mentioned, like, of course you didn't have an internship going into it, but what was it like then coming out of more of kind of having a theory knowledge of computer science and everything, of looking for a job and getting that onto into that first kind of practical
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah. I was taking, when I was in school, I was kind of taking it just, a semester at a time. And, well, one of the reasons I didn't take an internship is I had a pretty full load, and I wanted to get good grades,
Mm.
and all that. So I just didn't
Yeah.
choose to put something else into my life at the time that would make that more difficult. But University of Central Arkansas offered a career fair, and part of that was they would allow folks that were about to graduate. They would pair you up with companies for interviews. So they'd have companies come in to campus, and if there was like a particular field you were interested in, they would line you up with an interview with them. So it was really nice. They kind of handled all of it for you,
Yeah.
and it was a good way just to get exposure to the companies. So I think I had 2 or 3 interviews with various companies. This probably would have been like my last semester. One of those companies was Axiom, which has been here in Conway, Arkansas for many years. They're
Yeah.
pretty heavy development IT tech data company. I had like an initial interview with them there, and then they ended up calling me back later and saying, "Hey, we'd like to talk to you again." I didn't know what else I was going to do. Honestly, I kind of had. I wasn't thinking too far in advance. I was like, "Oh, I'm about to graduate. I guess I need to figure out what's coming next." And I really loved. I also studied mathematics in school, and I loved that, but there wasn't as much practical opportunity to go that direction. So when Axiom said, "Hey, we want to talk to you," I went and had a couple other interviews with them, and they hired me. So,
Nice.
and that ended up being a great experience. I'm glad I did that.
Yeah.
I did learn a
Yeah.
lot. There were some
Yeah.
smart folks there.
What kind of like what area were you on in that? Were you like on the back end, front end, or like on?
Yeah, I was hired into a team called Infobase at the time, one of Axiom's products, where they like aggregate all this consumer data, and then from tons of different data sources, put it into one huge database, massage it, and then basically they had a catalog of like, what type of stuff do you like to buy? And then they would sell that to companies. So they called it Infobase. I did get hired as a developer for a particular set of tools that managed like their metadata database around that product. So those tools were written in Visual Basic 6, actually. So I got hired in, and
Oh, okay.
they're like, actually, the guys that had written the tools were gone. Like that team had been shut down, and these tools were out there. They had a lot of bugs, and so the users were really frustrated because
Oh.
buggy tools and nobody knew how to fix them. So they basically recreated the team, and I got hired in on that effort. So I had never really done VB before, but so I had to do some VB6 stuff, and also did some C++ on Linux, which was a pretty fascinating. Okay. That was really an interesting project because it was parallelization of data processing on a grid infrastructure, where we were taking enormous amounts of data in and like splitting it and then processing the data in parallel. And that was all in C++, or at least the part I wrote.
Yeah. Well, what was it kind of like going into a job and your primary role of like your primary language that you're going to be working with, you've literally never worked with before in your life? What was that kind of like adjusting?
It was, challenging, but not too bad. I mean, it's one of those things like once you've had a few years in any language, to me, you seem to be able to it's pretty easy to transfer the knowledge. And so, especially when you're going from a language like C++, say, to VB, which is a semantically simpler language, at least structurally, it's more verbose. It's pretty easy to follow. And since I wasn't writing stuff from scratch, it's mostly like investigating code that had already been written. That's the nice thing is, you're kind of coming in, someone else has done most of the work, and you're just like, as you learn to find, fix bugs, you kind of figure out like, oh, okay, this is how this language works. This is how it's organized, And eventually you get really good at it. You kind of become the expert with time.
It was kind of like a replay of the monkey game from the original.
Yeah, kind of.
You were learning just by looking at the code.
So after that, I ended up leaving that company after a year and a half, and I took a job with a company called the Computer Works in Conway, Arkansas, which is really primarily they had started as like a computer sales, repair, network installation, IT company. And they also, eventually they became a very large internet service provider in the area. In fact, I'm using their internet right now. But they had a small software consulting team, with a few programmers who would write custom software for small businesses. And so I ended up taking a job with them. I was there for about 3 years. That was a fantastic learning experience for me because I was kind of thrown into a situation where it's like, you just got to figure this out. There were 3 or 4 developers total, and each one of us would typically take on a project, and you kind of had to own that project for the most part. There, I started doing a lot of C# on the .NET framework, which I ended up finding that I totally loved. I love C#. Did some more VB code as well, but it was there that I kind of learned a lot about design patterns, software architecture, and all that. I just had to teach myself, but it was challenging because we had to do everything. It was, we had to do all the requirements gathering. We had to write all the software, code it all, test it, write all the tests, do all the manual testing, do all the training, write all the documentation, and do the quoting, and so it was kind of stressful at times, but I learned a ton.
Yeah. And that kind of seems like a consistent thing. And I think this is kind of like an important part where I think a lot of programmers, whenever they're starting off, they are constantly like worrying. It's like, oh shoot, like this job they say that I need to know C# and I've only messed around in like Java or in whatever, in some other language, or like I've only messed around in Python or something like that. And oftentimes you kind of lose those opportunities that could have been a really great job and learning opportunity for you because you were like, no, I don't know that. I don't fit those sort of requirements. So, and it does kind of seem like from like your experience, you really don't need much knowledge of what you're actually going to be working on to get into that sort of field. A lot of learning it is learning by necessity and learning as you're on the job. So, I mean, what would you kind of say to a programmer who's wanting to get into it and let's say has been coding their own video games in Unity or whatever for like 5 years, but they want to get a job and let's say they're doing like C++ or some other language? What would you kind of say to them?
If you already have coding experience at all, I mean, I think probably a lot of people that would be hiring for a coding position will probably respect the fact that, okay, this person already has experience and it's not going to take them that much time to, get up to speed on maybe a different language or framework or whatever. So it just, I would just try it. If there's a job you want to do, you could always do some investigation ahead of time, like maybe do your own side project and just kind of to be able to say that I've worked in this language a little bit, even just on my own, because that seems to go a long way too. If you can just say, I don't necessarily have professional experience in this area, but I had a project I did where I used this language or framework. And so I put some effort and time into it. I really want to, work in this. That could be helpful.
Yeah, I think I've seen that to be a very useful thing to kind of present to them of, no, I have that experience and I also have the initiative, I think is a big thing that they're looking for. Absolutely. And being able to pick up those things fast and just that willingness. I think that's a lot of people will look at like a job offer and see all the requirements and think, oh, I don't meet it. I don't meet their requirements. Next. Whenever they should be looking at it as, okay, how can I meet these requirements, instead of just shutting it down like, okay, I can't work here. Like if you're really excited about what that business is about, you should go for it. You should put some effort in there and get some work done. But because it seems like that's a lot of what you were doing, was going to these businesses and it's like, okay, here's my experience, here's what I've done in the past, and let me try and help you. I may not be the perfect guy. I may not be able to hop on the job right away and get it all done, but you can pick it up and help.
And I will say software, if you get into like custom software like that, you learn fast because you can't really tell the customer that hey, I've never written in C# before. They don't need to know that. So you just, for all they know, you're a pro at it, and you just got to figure it out. And it kind of forces you to. So, but yeah, and as far as like job requirements too, like almost every job is they just really overstate the requirements most of the time anyway. Like nobody actually is able to measure up to that. So,
kind of from that place you were working for, the computer place, how long did you stay at that job, and like what was kind of the next step after that?
I was there for 3 years, worked on quite a few projects, and I ended up, an opportunity came up to work for a electronic medical record software company in Fayetteville, Arkansas. It was a C# based piece of software. So it was a really good fit for me because by the time I had about 3 years of experience at this one company, I'd done a lot of C#. That was the next step. I think the consulting work was lots of ups and downs. You put a lot of effort into some projects that ended up not going. I wouldn't say they flopped, but they ended up not working out the way you thought they would for the customer. And so, there was quite a bit of stress with that line of work, even though I learned so much. So when this opportunity came up, it was pretty appealing to me. Because I was going to be more like, working on an established piece of software with a lot of code already written and just adding new features to it. I wasn't going to be working directly with the customers. I ended up working with them for 7 years. The company was called Soapware.
Wow.
And it was their main program was patient management software for doctors' offices, mainly smaller doctors' offices. But it was a Windows application, written in C#. It was a pretty complex piece of software and had some pretty interesting and cool features to it that were very innovative for that specific niche. And it had its own interesting history because the guy who really, the first programmer for that company years before, the company was started by a physician, and he ended up hiring a college grad from University of Arkansas to code the main C# code base. It was pretty interesting to me. So one of my issues that I have always had is I over-design things. I kind of tend to overthink things, and I like building things so rock solid that you could beat it with, a sledgehammer and it's not going to come apart. The problem with that mentality for a lot of, people who are trying to sell software or build it, to market it, is they don't want you to spend tons and tons of time building out every last, little detail you can think of. They really need to see, is the customer going to buy this thing? And so, so the other extreme is rapid code development, get it out the door, and then sell it. And if
Yeah.
you do it too fast, you're going to have tons of bugs, lots of problems, but you figure that out later. And so I was on the
Mm.
one extreme of I overthought things probably too much. The guy who wrote the original code base was the other extreme. He could write code faster than anybody. It was unbelievable how I don't even know how he wrote this program because it was probably hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and a lot of it he had
My
done
word.
himself. And it was a lot of it was very buggy and very. I hope he doesn't listen to this and take offense because I highly respect him. But he tended to be kind of sloppy. And but
Uh,
the thing is, he got it out the door and they sold the product. And I don't think I
mm.
could have done that honestly. So I learned something
Wow.
there. There's a tight line you got to walk there of you don't want to over code, you don't want to undercode
Mm.
either, but you can go either way and kind of get yourself in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
later on, I'd worked on that main product for like 3 years. They had a billing product as well I worked on, and with like insurance claim stuff. But then we started a web app, a patient portal web app called My Healthware,
Hmm.
and that was written on ASP.NET MVC. So C# server side code with a lot of JavaScript, and we were using Angular
Mm.
version 1 at the time for the web front end. And
Hmm.
so I had about 3 or 4 years experience in that. So that's I got it. That's really I had done some JavaScript before, but that's really where I got really experienced with it and enjoyed that a
Mm.
lot. Yeah, it was a fun product to work on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Um,
that's cool. And you got how many years then in total were you working that with that company? Was that the 7 or?
that was the 7 years. We
Oh,
got
okay.
bought out by a larger competitor, and they had to lay everybody
Mm.
off. So
Oh,
it was kind
wow.
of an
Wow.
unexpected and sad ending.
What was
Yeah,
that like having to enter into the job market again, like just boom, sudden after being
it
at a
was.
job consistently for like 7 years?
Yeah, it was tough. Yeah, because I had been working for 12 years. At least I'd had a job for the last 12 previous
Wow.
years up to
Hmm.
that point. When you add them all together, it was a little nerve wracking. I wasn't too worried about it, and they gave us plenty of like time to think about things. It wasn't like an immediate thing. We had some runway to work with, but
Mm.
the guy who was the product team lead on the team I was working on for the patient portal product, he knew a bunch of folks at Red Hat. And so
Mm.
everyone was scrambling, like, okay, we just got to get a resume out to all these companies as fast as we can. So resumes were flying everywhere. And he said, I'll float your resume to Red Hat. And he had told me about
Mm.
these friends he had at Red Hat before. And from everything he said, I'm like, good grief, this sounds like a dream job. I would love to work for this company based on what he said. And so I said, yeah,
Mm.
please send my resume. I didn't even know what I was applying for. Um, I just knew I was really interested in the company.
Mm.
So it turns out I was applying for a support role for the OpenShift product.
Mm.
And they, so even though, Red Hat is mostly a Linux really focused company, I guess because of my programming experience, which a lot of time, I guess they don't see many folks come from a programming background into the support role. Usually people leave support to go to
Mm.
programming. So they, I guess we're like, well, we'll give you a chance. Yeah, that's how I ended up getting the job at Red Hat was through that connection there.
Wow. What do you kind of like? Do you like this one more or less, or what's kind of your experience now having worked on both sides of things, of having on the support end and more of the actual
Yeah.
hard coding development? What do you like about either side, or what's kind of the
Yeah.
differences and stuff?
Well, I'm always, I think, going to love the problem solving aspect of coding and just think there's something about
Mm.
it that I don't know. it's just fun to get in there and like build stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and I will say it was a good time for me to have a different focus because, one thing about development work is it's very heads down. And
Mm.
it can be a lot of like problem solving in your own head, not as much collaboration with other people sometimes.
Hmm.
And I was at a point where I was like, I need to kind of get out of my own head And so I was just kind of exhausted with the problem solving aspect. And honestly, after working in software development for 10 plus years, you kind of start solving the same problems. And it's like, okay, I've kind of been here, done that. I've solved this problem before. So it starts to lose a little of its appeal. That's kind of why it appealed to me to change. It's turned out to be, it was a great change for me because the customer support focuses, I never know what I'm going to get on any given day. I'm working with trying to help. It's still problem solving. You're just helping
Yeah.
the end customer solve their problems. Or in my role, I also do a lot of collaborative work with our other support engineers and try to help them out. So it's a high level of collaboration, extremely high level of collaboration. A lot of camaraderie with the team, a lot of communication with customers and team members every single day. And then when the day's over, it's done. I don't have a lot of long-term projects I have to worry about, at least not very often. Sometimes it'll happen, but versus like if you have like say a very large code feature you're working on and then everybody else is waiting on you to get that done by a certain deadline.
Yeah.
You'll feel that pressure of, hey, when are you going to get this to us? And it's a different kind of stress though, because you got to get on customer calls and they may be having a really bad day, and you got to work them through their problems. So, but I found it really rewarding. Actually, I'm really grateful for the programming experience I had because with my role, my title is software maintenance engineer. So technically I could code. I could get into the code base and do bug fixes. I haven't done a lot of that yet. That's actually something I would like to get into a lot more going forward. But I would still kind of like to stay in the support role and also have one foot in the code side and one foot in the customer support side. It kind of be the best of both worlds to me.
Would you recommend it as a good field for somebody who is like has that like programming and that like problem solving brain and like loves coding?
I would say so. It probably depends on what you're wanting to do. So for different companies probably work differently in this fashion, but for Red Hat, which is, I would recommend anybody apply at Red Hat. I love the company. I think they treat their employees really well. I really enjoy working for them. And I will say this, Red Hat is an open source company. So like all of our code is open source and available online, which is a very unique company model. So in particular, say you wanted to get into the open source world, which is pretty niche in a sense. A great way to do that is to get hired at a company like Red Hat as a support engineer. If say you're interested in software engineering, a lot of people come in the door through support. And then after a couple of years of experience, they move to engineering. So support, people from all backgrounds end up in the support role. There's really, literally you could probably come from a completely non-IT or programming background and still, if you impress folks enough with your zeal and your knowledge, you have a shot at getting hired in support. And then once you've done that, as long as you can prove yourself, you can probably get into a programming role. So I see it as a great stepping stone, especially if you're trying to get into a bigger company where there's it's a highly competitive environment and it may be really hard to get, say, a software developer role immediately.
And what language does Red Hat use? Like what language are you mostly dealing with?
My OpenShift product is mostly written in Golang. I had never worked in Go at all until I got this job.
Oh wow!
I've done a little bit of Go. I've done a little bit of Go programming, not a lot, but I've done a lot of reading and like traversing the code base to do my current role.
Well, kind of wrapping things up a little bit here. Is there, after like all of that and after all of your experience doing stuff, what would you kind of say? Like, what's at least one thing that you would say to somebody like a young person who's getting into this and is like, okay, where do I start? It's like, I love programming, but what should I be focusing on? What would be the best use of my time?
The one cool thing about like coding and development work, I think, is that you don't have to get a degree to do it if you don't want to. Like getting a degree is a great route if you're willing to put the time in on the schooling. You learn a lot, and it gets you in the front door for a lot of companies. If they see the degree, they'll probably take you seriously. But you don't have to do that. A lot of people have been successful in this field without going to school for it. So, if you're really interested, and honestly, I have not kept up with a lot of the learning tools out there. I know there's a lot of great ones, I'm sure, online now. But I think I'd probably tell someone who's maybe they don't have a lot of coding experience at all and they just want to get into it is learn JavaScript. Because the setup for it is so simple. You basically just need a web browser, and there's some really good JavaScript learning tools online that give you an environment to, learn how to do things in JavaScript and practice it, run your code in your browser, and that's all you need. And then JavaScript, it's a unique language, but it's very similar to C, C++, Java. Syntactically, it has a lot of similarities. So then it's not too hard to transfer that knowledge to other languages. But the other thing I would say, I would never have thought this really before until I'm in my current role at an open source company, and that is go find this. This can be challenging, but there's thousands and thousands of really good open source projects out there on, say, GitHub.com. So you could go out there, find something that looks interesting to you, and browse the code, download the code base, learn how to build it, learn how to make changes to it. If you've had a little experience, even kind of start learning how to make code contributions to an open source project, because that's the cool thing about it, is anybody can contribute. That would be it would be intimidating to do if you hadn't had a lot of experience, but I think it can be done. If you want to, it just would take some time. But I will say, if you contributed to a open source project, that is fantastic for your resume. People would be really impressed with that. And the cool thing about that is, anybody can do it. You don't have to go to school for it. If you can teach yourself the basic skills, you can eventually learn how to contribute to an open source repo.
And even if you're looking for a job with like an open source company, you could even get in their code and show and like maybe solve a problem for them.
They'd be so impressed.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. This has been a great conversation.
Well, thank you, Luke. I appreciate your willingness to talk to me. It's been fun to kind of think through the last 20 to 30 years of my life. A lot of fond memories, for sure.
Yeah,
it's something I've always enjoyed. So,
all right. Well, okay. I think that about wraps up that then. Thanks everyone for listening to the first episode. You can follow or subscribe, whatever the heck this is going to have for upcoming episodes. They're going to be coming out every single week for quite a few weeks coming now. So hope you enjoyed, and I will see all of you guys next time. Goodbye.